Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
and inspire you to do even greater things.
Before we jump into today's conversation, a special thanks to PM Power Consulting for encouraging and supporting this show right from the start. With over 1,000 person-years of collective experience, PM Power has helped many organizations, teams, and individuals chart out their own journeys of excellence and make progress. Thank you, PM Power. Now, let's move to today's episode. My guest today is Michael Ferranti, VP of Marketing at Unleash. In this conversation, Michael recounts his journey from the banking sector to the tech world, which started during the 2008 financial crisis. He explains how the launch of Amazon's cloud services led him to join Rackspace, a leading hosting provider at that time. Michael emphasizes the importance of culture in a company's success and delves into his career in developer tools, touching upon the shifts in cloud computing, containerization, and microservices architecture up to the current generative AI revolution. He discusses the differences between building software for financial services and for developers, stressing the necessity of upskilling to maintain credible conversations with the target audiences. The key insights he shared include best practices for feature management, emphasizing the importance of small batch sizes in DevOps, and the critical need for empathy and strong mission alignment in work culture. Michael concludes with some career advice for those looking to enter a career in marketing or advance their roles in software marketing, highlighting the importance of curiosity and adaptability in a fast evolving tech landscape. Listen on. Hi, Michael. Welcome to the Software People Stories.
Hi, good morning. How are you doing?
Good. Like we always do, we'll start with a self-introduction, how you got into IT, and then what has been your career trajectory, and then take it from there.
Okay, sounds great. So my foray into tech generally started around the 2008 financial crisis. So I was relatively young in my career and had started out in banking and financial services. And 2028 or 2008 financial crisis, it was early enough where I hadn't really built a career in banking. And I was thinking, is is this the career path of the future? And I looked around and I noticed that, I think just a couple of years prior, Amazon had launched S3 and EC2, kind of creating the first cloud computing environment. And this kind of broad category of infrastructure as a service, software as a service was coming online. And I was lucky to, through kind of, applying for a variety of positions outside of financial services to, kind of get on a bigger growth train, was able to join a company called Rackspace, which was at the time we called it a hosting provider. It sounds like I see some nods, you might be familiar. And kind of at the time, 2008, this was really before Amazon Web Services was Amazon Web Services. And if you had applications that you needed to run and you didn't want to basically run your own data center or kind of, truly rent, like buy your own servers, but then rent data center space, you would go with a hosting provider. And Rackspace was kind of I would say more of an IT shop at the time. And in the sense that it was really run by system administrators, people that understood Linux, understood, patching and updating servers, but it really wasn't a software shop. However, it had an amazing culture. In fact, I would argue to this day that Rackspace's competitive advantage was its culture, and we can maybe come back to that in terms of, you
Yeah.
know, how big of an impact really is culture when it comes to software. I think it's actually huge. And they realized that if we're going to survive, we need to become a software company.
Okay.
And I was lucky enough to be mentored by an early leader at Rackspace who went on to run Rackspace's cloud business, which was a small part of the overall portfolio, but the fastest growing part. And in that, I really learned about one, marketing, and how to tell stories to technical audiences, two, kind of the business of software, and three, kind of fundamentals around building and selling product.
Right.
And then from there, kind of, a variety of other large companies, startups kind of came, and I ended up specializing in what I'll call the developer tools ecosystem. So it's software for people building software, and those people generally are software developers, sometimes product managers as well, but generally speaking, software developers. And kind of over the generations of reinvention, I saw cloud computing, I saw containerization, kind of, decomposing monolithic applications into microservices, and you've got Kubernetes coming online, and now we've got kind of this, Gen AI revolution happening. And I've had a front seat at a number of different successful startups during that journey, and I've learned a lot, and eager to kind of share some of that with your audience today, and hopefully get some pointers from you on some of the things that you've seen working and not working as well in software.
Oh, that's wonderful, Michael. I think you've literally ridden the waves of all these technologies and stuff like that. So, first curiosity question is uh, in the BFSI space, where it is probably more of the domain and what you need to do for, say, users who, again, use money, to something for the developer space. Did you see any difference in terms of how you see the users, or how do you develop something for them?
Great question. So, when I was in financial services, it was actually I was more on the operational side.
Hmm.
So this was kind of institutional, basically institutional trading. So,
Okay.
large monetary trades and settlements and things like that. And so, I was a consumer of software,
Hmm.
but I was not providing software to financial services. Then going into the developer space, one of the big things that I learned is that as a non-developer, I'm never going to know as much as the person that I'm selling to
Mm.
about what I'm selling. And that's often not the case when you're in sales or marketing. There are a lot of technologies where kind of the level of expertise required to really understand how they work is relatively minimal. Or kind of you would only hire people that understand on that particular technology. Developer tools is a little bit different. And so I really needed to upskill myself in order to be able to have credible conversations with those audiences. And I've always been a curious person, and I love to read. And that's kind of my comfort zone is when confronted with a challenge, it's, go do the research, read the books, find out what other people say about it, look at multiple sources. And I kind of did that with gusto and abandon when I was early in my tech career. And then also there's the saying, if you really want to understand something, teach it. In the early days of before we even really called it content marketing, I created with a collaborator who's an entrepreneur and cloud computing commentator himself out of New Zealand. We created a program called Cloud University for Rackspace.
So, Michael, after being a user of software in BFSI,
Yeah.
the kind of expectations, and when you're now working with solutions for developers, if you look at it from a developer's point of view, how different are the users in application domains like banking and developers who are going to develop all kinds of solutions?
Yeah, excellent question. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and so kind of stop me if I talk for the next 2 hours on it, because in a lot of ways the differences are very minor. In a lot of ways the differences are huge, and let me explain what I mean there. I think the differences are minor in the sense that software doesn't care if your customers are logging in to create a financial transaction or logging in to order dinner. Like computers don't care. It's all the same to them. It's all zeros and ones, API calls. And so in that sense, there really isn't any difference in terms of how does your product or service enable um, increasingly, I would say, functionality that is part of these large scale distributed applications. And so that could be, you're providing some type of queue or message bus, you're providing some type of logging or analytics service, you're providing an API to generate, an email or text message. It doesn't matter what the end use case is. However, where it matters a lot is in the context of how those companies are able to procure and ultimately use software, and what that software needs to do outside of the direct domain of solving the technical problem that your software enables. So I'll give an example from my current company, Unleash, which is we make a solution to enable functionality features to be toggled on and off in production. And you would want to do this because if you're if you're creating a new feature and you want to test it with a small number of users, you want to enable it for a targeted group. You want to be able to monitor usage, errors, and if it looks good, you want to roll it out to more people. If it looks like there's a bug, you want to roll it back. That's what our software provides. And this, broadly speaking, is called feature management. We actually call it feature ops, which is slightly different. Maybe we'll talk about that later. For all intents and purposes, for now, it doesn't really matter. This is an established category, and there are multiple vendors in the space that do what we do, broadly speaking. So when we have a financial services customer, for instance, one of our Prudential, we just had our annual user conference, and we heard from Prudential, who's a large kind of financial service provider, insurance provider, based in the US, although global. And we heard from that team about how they're adopting feature ops, and it was very interesting. Now, when they were evaluating a technology provider, they had to understand the technical requirements. Okay, we want to do ABC, and we need a solution that does ABC well. However, they had what generally in product management we would call non-functional requirements, things that really don't have anything to do with the technical problem, but have to do with how they buy software through procurement. Perhaps kind of security and compliance and auditability that goes into using any tool. And that's where, one, when you sell to larger organizations, you need to think about how your product does a whole host of things beyond what you solve technically. And for instance, single sign-on doesn't have anything to do with error monitoring, doesn't have anything to do with feature flags, doesn't have anything to do with, logging, like but it's an essential requirement, and the list goes on and on. Maybe you need chargeback so that consumers of your API can distribute the cost internally amongst various groups. These are things that you need to think about when you go after different verticals. And financial services, one of the big ones that comes up is always security, compliance, and auditability. For instance, one of our customers, a large bank in the UK, has to log and audit every single read and write to their core databases.
Okay.
So when we enable changes for applications that impact the database, all of those also need to be logged and audited. So it's not so much that the developer cares, but the organization cares a lot depending on the industry that it's in.
Yeah, what I meant was the choice of selecting a particular tool or a platform. Uh, for a business user, it's probably a little easier directly in terms of what is the value that it adds to business and how their workflows are changing. But
Yes.
when it is a developer who is deciding, I mean, from my experience of working with developers and provisioning tools across a large enterprise and so on, there are many who have very specific requirements, or they say that no, no, I want only this tool, or I want to do this ABC, or I would rather do it myself than go for a tool, etc.
Yeah.
So, how do you uh, kind of present your value proposition?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. There's this is kind of the in some ways I miss the days of, being able to sell to the CIO, and the answer to all developers are, why do I have to use this why do I have to use an Oracle database, right? Why can't I use MySQL? Well, the answer is because you work here. We're an Oracle shop, and if you want to continue to work here, you'll use Oracle and you'll love it. And that's completely changed. Now we have developers that, you join the organization and it's like, do you want Windows, Linux, or Mac? And then, on that computer, what IDE do you want to use? Do you want to use Docker Desktop? Do you want to use this? Do you want to use that? Not only can you use MySQL, but you can use, MongoDB, you can use Postgres, you can use, Kafka, Cassandra, CockroachDB. Like you get to pick your tools. Um, and that means you really have to uh, kind of step zero in that environment is to really focus on the developer experience with whatever product that you're creating. There is not a generic developer experience that you need to optimize for. There are specific experiences for specific developers doing specific tasks. And so you really need to understand, where does your tool fit into the rest of their stack, and how do you optimize that experience? That's number one. If you don't do that, then you're not going to get bottoms up adoption.
Mhm.
However, if you only do that, you're probably also not going to get a sale, because generally speaking, developers don't have checkbooks within large organizations.
Mhm.
Now, within smaller organizations, if you're a 10-person team, a 50-person team, let's say up to 500-person, there's generally some autonomy for individual developers to make purchasing decisions.
Mhm.
But when you're an enterprise software, and the average sales price of your product maybe is $100,000 or more, you really are going to be selling to IT management or engineering management. And then in addition to that, you're going to be having to get those approved by, sometimes all the way up to the CFO. And we've seen that increasingly in the last few years, kind of post kind of 2020, really 2021, where just checkbooks have really, with inflation, have really gotten quite tight. So you need to kind of optimize, you need to help your customers, your developers, understand how they can sell the product internally as providing more than a technical solution to a technical problem that most people don't understand, but rather how they connect it to business value within their organization.
Just extending that a little bit, we normally talk about empathy for the users, understanding their personas and what they do, etc. In this case, when it's one developer developing for other developers,
Mm,
and we know that typically the architects or tech leads and organizations also have very, with a lot of reason, defined approaches to do it. Now, this is the architecture I want, this is the tech stack I want to use, etc. So, how does a developer creating dev tools empathize with that or understand or balance the different requirements? So, who do you develop for?
yeah, great question. So it's a team effort, first of all. We have a team of engineers, and product managers and UX designers who are responsible for um, kind of creating products, and in some cases you might have one individual who does all of those roles for a small feature, and in other places, if we're really redesigning the entire interface, they might only work on a tiny part of it. But the empathy starts with understanding those users, and what they're trying to accomplish. We call this at Unleash the User Journey, and I know we're not alone in that, of deeply understanding the user journey, which is, what is that person trying to accomplish? and really taking what we call also an outside-in perspective.
Mhm.
So instead of thinking about kind of our own software and how do we fit the user into it, we think about how do we fit our software into the user's day. And so that comes from direct conversation with the customers. We have, for instance, our customer success team is meeting regularly with our customers, and they're always asking, how are things going? What could we improve? What's working well? What could work better? And then we're taking that feedback. In fact, in our organization, on a weekly basis, we have kind of an all-company meeting every Friday. We call it happy hour. It's just a chance to get together and hear from individuals across the organization about what you're working on. We do demos and we celebrate wins. Every week, the customer success team is sharing quotes with the company. This is what we heard from user X at company Y. And so developers, even if you are not speaking to other engineers at our end customers every single day, because right, you're writing software and there's a cost to context switching. You're at least regularly getting feedback. The other piece, which I strongly advise for developer tools companies, is have your software developers be on support rotation. It's absolutely critical. And I think most engineers who really understand the need to be confronted with the pain or bugs that their software that they've designed causes so that they can make it better won't have a problem with this. It's not that anybody likes being on call. No one does. However, I think it's essential, and that's also a cultural practice here at Unleash, as well as it has been at many of other software developer companies. There's nothing makes you so empathetic as being woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning and realizing that when you designed it this way, you assumed one thing, and that thing actually is not the case, and that with another set of assumptions, you can get a full night's of sleep. That really helps a lot.
So before I come to the culture question that you talked about, because this is all about a lot of people coming together and then trying to create something, a little more on the whole approach of using feature flags and trunk-based development is all very popular. But then when some of these features get turned on or off at runtime, how does one really test before it is put into production?
Yeah, the way that you test it is by testing in production, and it's counterintuitive. And so let me say a few words on that. The One of the things that kind of the hopefully your audience is familiar with this concept, DevOps, which is kind of it's the new way of running software applications. Previously, we had development teams and we had operations teams that developers would write code and operations teams would run code. And it didn't work well in a lot of ways. One, because of what I just said, is like the ops team was the one that was getting woken up in the morning, and the dev team was sleeping through the night, not knowing that their software was causing these issues. And there was a cultural divide between software developers and the ops people. And large organizations like Netflix and Amazon Web Services realize that there's a better way to organize internally in order to run large scale applications. This is based on smaller teams that are both producing the code and running the code. We call this generally DevOps. And one of the principles of DevOps is small batch sizes. So instead of doing kind of a what we call a big bang release, where we have, okay, here's our quarterly release, right? Sales and marketing are going to be talking about this with customers, and we want to release it all at once. So there's a big bang, like a Super Bowl ad, right? You expose this and everybody applauds because it's so wonderful. The reality of that is that you're more likely to come up with bugs than a great experience, because the large batch size of that change is very, very difficult in order to test all of the different permutations, and it doesn't matter how big your QA team is. So one of the things that DevOps tells us is keep your batch sizes small, which is one of the reasons, not to get too technical, you mentioned trunk-based development, which is why trunk-based development is so popular, because it's this idea that I'm going to make a small change and I'm going to push it into production. When you have a very, very small change, it's easier to see the implications of that change across the rest of the system, both with automated test, also with testing, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes for those listening, in production. And
Mhm.
the way that you test in production is by rolling that out to a small number of users. These could be even internal users,
Yeah.
right? If you work at a bank and you're thinking like, I really don't want to test in production with even a small number of people that are trying to do a wire transfer, that seems crazy.
Mhm.
That's not the only way to test in production. You can do internal testing as well. Then you can test with, beta users or users in one particular environment or users that have maybe less complex transaction. Maybe it's a domestic transfer versus an international transfer. And you can slowly build up confidence that that capability is working, and then you can roll it out. And feature flags are the mechanism that enables this type of change. And not to get too technical, but there's an organization called Dora,
Yeah.
which is it's now owned by Google. It creates metrics for measuring how effective you are at rolling out software changes. And there are a bunch of metrics that measure kind of how frequently these deployments into production create errors. And teams that ship more often in smaller batch sizes do better on these metrics. And those metrics are also highly correlated with financial success. So if you look at, market capitalization growth or revenue or profitability, these kind of DevOps metrics are also highly correlated with business outcomes. And it's counterintuitive for non-product people to think about if we're shipping more, if we're worried about bugs and we ship more often, we're probably going to get more bugs. It's actually the opposite. If you're worried about bugs and poor user experience, you should ship more frequently because you're going to get less bugs.
Yeah, that makes sense. What I was trying to understand was also uh, when you want to simulate the runtime and you want to run tests of what will happen, the number of paths that it can take, will depend on the combinations of these different features that are turned on or off.
Mhm.
Now, whether it's a simple A/B testing kind of a situation, or you want to do a phased rollout by geography or by user
Yep.
segment, or no, whatever. Which means that the behavior of your solution is going to depend a lot on managing these features.
Mhm.
So at design time or during development time, now, are there any good practices that you've come across that help in making sure that irrespective of various combinations, you still have a high confidence that everything will work?
Yeah, there are, and I'll provide context at a high level, because this is another one that, if I was having a drink with someone, I could talk for hours on it. In fact, we wrote a guide that we call 11 Principles for scaling and managing a feature flag system, and it goes into very detailed into a lot of detail around these specific practices. So I'll highlight a couple. So one is, and it sounds counterintuitive again, is retiring these code paths when they're no longer necessary. So the general idea with a feature flag is you have a hypothesis, right? I want to make this change, and that could be because it's gonna make us more money, users are gonna be more happy, it's gonna solve some problem. And through the testing process, you realize if you're right or wrong. And if you're right, you want to keep that feature, and if you're wrong, you want to kind of start over. Um, the feature flag itself, it lives in code. It's essentially an if statement, right? If this flag is flipped on, then we want to show this code path. If it's flipped off, we want to show this code path. So you can have code paths in your code that are flipped off that are essentially not doing anything and thus not affecting the user experience. However, there's always a risk that they get turned on.
Mhm.
And when that happens, if it's an old, for instance, it's referencing an old library that you were using when that feature flag was active, and now you have a code path that's referencing a dependency that is no longer active, then like you're going to create issues. So best practice is to retire feature flags as they are no longer being actively used. That's probably the number one thing that we recommend to our customers, and we have a lot of software in our tool, including automated cleanup, that makes this really, really easy. The other thing would be when flags are evaluated, and if you have complex microservices applications, evaluating flags once, kind of high up in your stack versus deep down within the code. Because if you evaluate too many flags in any one session, then there is more of a risk that you could be, depending on the particular context, turning on or turning off a flag. And so good code practices about where you place those flags are, it's similar to, how do you organize your code generally, where you will centrally apply some method that could apply broadly across many different many different applications, and you do that centrally versus embedding that functionality directly within a service. It's similar for how you think about your flags.
Yeah. All this sounds highly technical, and the people who are working on creating these solutions also are likely to be more geeky, I would assume. You did mention the importance of culture. So how do you get these highly skilled people, to work together and have some kind of a common culture?
Great question. Well, I think developers, I think, they do think different for sure. However, they're first and foremost people. And so I think the cultural practices that work for engineering teams may not look exactly like for, say, if your business has, hires 10 interior designers. The office might not look the same. However, a lot of the things that are going to make for a great workplace, like clear communication, clear expectation, alignment to shared values, do work the same. And the number one thing that I believe is important in culture is a strong mission. And then hiring people, recruiting people, and hiring people that are already bought into that mission. It's very, very difficult if someone doesn't believe in something to get them to believe into it. I know I'm a marketer, right? That's my job. And sometimes there are just things that you're not going to convince somebody. And for instance, our mission at Unleash is to make lives easier for developers. Like that's what animates us as a company. And so when we take our mission and then we turn it into what are the values that drive our behavior so that we can best fulfill that mission, we end up with things like an experimentation culture, where we want to, if we're going to make a mistake, we want to do it quickly, we want to learn from it, and we want to improve. That's a cultural attribute that people who have that mindset really thrive at a company like Unleash. People that don't have that mindset, maybe if they're perfectionists.
Okay.
And I want my code to be perfect, because I want to make lives easier for developers. I want my code to be perfect, because if it's not perfect, then I'm going to make it hard. Well, one of the things that we embrace because of, in a way, the platform that we create, which prioritizes high volume of small changes, is this experimentation mindset. And so if there's a disconnect, it's not that that person is wrong. There are many places in which perfection is actually quite admirable and a core value of another company. However, that's not a core value here. So getting people who already believe in those things, and that means being clear about what your values are in the interview process, and then making sure that those values are being used within your organization on a regular basis to resolve conflict. And I'm a big fan of using, when we have a difficult situation, using our values to resolve it, because it creates a common language. And our VP of engineering is really, really good at this. And I think it helps a lot create a shared culture. For instance, we have a value of never jeopardize customer trust. Very, very important to us that our customers trust that we have their best interests in mind, even when maybe what's best for them isn't best for us. Over the long term, if we do what's best for our customers, it is best for us. But maybe in the short term, there's an instance, say, a customer wants us to, there was some mistaken configuration there. They would like a credit on their account because we billed them for some usage that was a mistake. And it's like, well, in that's revenue that, we otherwise can't capture. But it's probably the best thing for the customer long term to give them a credit in good faith. We have another value, which is this experimentation. Fail publicly, fail fast. And you could say, well, maybe there's an instance where we want to ship some new feature, and that's consistent with our speed and our experimentation value. But if we do it, there's a risk that it could go to a customer and have some unforeseen consequences.
Mhm.
And so these values are in conflict with each other. And how we resolve that is really, really important. And it buys people into the culture because they are thinking through these complex problems. And the last thing I'll say on this is developers are, it's knowledge work. They tend to be very intellectual and they enjoy not just coding challenges, but also these business challenges of how do we balance, speed and transparency, for instance.
Yeah, I think it's really very complex. And also the domain you're in, there's so many changing technologies, so many changing preferences, and so on. So how do you stay up to date?
In With what? Great question. Depending on what the subject is, I have different methods. What
No,
are you
in
most
your role,
interested
on one side, you come between the developers who create solutions and the consumers or the users who are going to be using that.
in?
And developers may have a certain lag time, or unless you're inventing some new technologies, in which case that needs to be communicated to the users in their language. Or the users might have seen something and say that, no, can I get this in your solution? Right. First, to be able to understand what they want and also communicate in terms that they would understand. Yeah. So how do
Yeah,
you keep up to date? Yeah.
excellent question. It's a challenge because on if I think about it a little bit as a spectrum and how I where I decide to sit on that spectrum is going to depend on the day. There's something to be said for intense focus time where you kind of close out the world and work on a problem set just based on what you already know. Because if you the world isn't going to hold constant for you to make the perfect decision. You have to make decisions based on uncertainty and sometimes just saying, hey, we really, really believe based on our previous customer conversations that uh this is the right approach. Um at the same time, if you're not taking into consideration, for instance, there's a new competitor comes on in the space that affects what ultimately we review decision, and you are ignoring that, like you can ultimately come to the wrong conclusion. So I tend to go through I tend to go through periods where I'll do a lot of reading and research, and then I'll try to assimilate that reading and research in my day job, and then go through another period when something new in the industry comes along. And I think AI would be an example of this. So I started in cloud computing, really understood deeply cloud computing, deeply understood that, and then I assimilated that knowledge and could act on it. Then DevOps came, and I wasn't part of a DevOps culture, so I intensely learned that, and then I was able to assimilate. And now generative AI has come along, and I'm intensely learning that. And so it's kind of these periods of learning, which one is just kind of it's how my brain wired. I really enjoy that stimulation, but at the same time. I can't spend all of my day on Hacker News, and the
Yeah.
developers in your audience will know what I mean by that. It's basically,
Yeah.
it's just super interesting articles from all over the web about technical topics, sometimes non-technical topics, and you get kind of pulled down that rabbit hole. If you spend all your day on Hacker News, keeping up to date, you can't do anything innovative yourself.
Yeah. So as we come to the close of our conversation, I just wanted to know if you have any career tips for two segments of people who would like to be in marketing software solutions. Okay. Those who are probably at the entry level and those who are mid-career who want a change or want to know if they could explore a marketing role.
Yeah. The big thing would be to be curious. That's the biggest thing. Because without curiosity, you're gonna struggle to adapt. And I tell this to my own kids. They're kind of in their mid-teen years, and I have no idea what the world is going to look like in 10 years. I have no idea. And what advice I can even give them in terms of a career to pick or how to approach their job, like things that I've learned in my career, I think are not necessarily going to be irrelevant, but the world's going to look a lot different. And so curiosity and willingness to learn and adapt is, I think, the key piece for anybody starting out in their career. When I hire somebody, I want someone first and foremost that can think independently and not, I would sacrifice on knowledge, skills, and ability related to specific tasks. If it means that I'm getting someone that is can think at a higher level, independent of their own personal experience, because things are changing so much that the tools that you might be an expert at today might not even exist 2 years from now. And if I hired you for that specific skill, then we're both going to be in trouble when it's no longer relevant.
But you do see scope for software to continue to be an interesting or a lucrative career.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the software is not going anywhere. How software is built is changing. From a marketing perspective, there are tons of companies that are going to, I think eclipse in terms of market capitalization anything that we've seen previously. I just wrote a blog post about OpenAI and some of its ambitions as an independent software provider. So not just as a provider of LLMs, but actually as what I would call an ISV, an independent software vendor, where because of the moat that they have around the AI models, you could imagine using that information to themselves create the next generation Gmail and Salesforce.com and Intuit, TurboTax, and like one company that is now creating all of these different core business applications.
Mhm.
Um, like that's a really exciting place to work. And I think in any role in sales and marketing and software engineering, software is not going anywhere. But how you succeed in a career is changing. And that's something that, I can't really, I'm navigating it myself. And I think everybody is, but as they say, the greatest hex you can place on somebody is may you live in interesting times. And for better or worse, we all live in interesting times.
Yeah. On that positive note, Michael, thanks a lot for sharing your perspectives and a quick deep dive into the world of feature flags, DevOps, and all the other related things. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.